What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. And if you guys didn't see it today, Joe Schoen just did a press conference at the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine. He sat up there for about 30 minutes at 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time this morning and answered all of the questions that the reporters had for him. He talked about Saquon Barkley a little bit, said that he's happy for him, didn't really indicate that he has any regrets, but then he talked a lot about the quarterback position. He received a lot of questions. Brief minor update before we talk about the quarterbacks. He did say that Andrew Thomas is out of a walking boot, progressing nicely, and is back in the weight room, and that Dexter Lawrence also is progressing nicely and is on track. Both of those guys are expected to be ready by the start of the regular season. But talking about the quarterback position, there were a lot of questions asked, and he gave some interesting answers. You know Joe Schoen, he's not going to give too much. We all saw Hard Knocks last year. He sits with his assistant and they come up with scripted answers to hand to the press before they do these kinds of press conferences. But even still, there were some interesting responses that he gave. In particular, he said that the Giants want to add a veteran quarterback this offseason. We've heard rumblings of that before, but now we know for sure that that is a priority for them. At least that's the way Joe Schoen made it seem. And he also said that he's open to all different avenues in order to add that quarterback, whether that's through the draft, whether that's through free agency, and of course through the 2025 NFL free agency market and trade market, as well. So Matt Stafford was brought up. He didn't answer that, but we've got some takeaways in particular about the Giants' ability to trade in this draft. Joe Schoen said he's very much open to trading down, to trading up, and a few minutes later, Tennessee Titans GM said they received calls from teams inside the top 5 trying to trade up for the number 1 overall pick. So our wheels are turning here. We got a lot to discuss. We're going to go ahead and react to all of the major quotes from Joe Schoen in today's press conference. But before we do, Alex, how you doing today, my friend? And what are your thoughts on that press conference?
Doing pretty good, man. That press conference was interesting. A lot of stuff that, Anthony and I were texting back and forth, kind of scratching our head about, wondering what the direction here is with Joe Schoen. He, of course, as always, and not to anyone's surprise, left things very, very open, very vague. Basically answered everything open-ended. Well, we want to do this. We're open to going up. We're open to going back. And, we know the Giants are not probably a team that's going to be trading back in this draft class. They probably don't want to pass on one of the blue chip prospects, whether it's Carter, whether it's Travis Hunter, or one of the quarterbacks. One of the most interesting things that he said, Anthony, I think we can start here. It's a good place to kind of kick off this conversation, is specifically, and this is kind of what I've been saying for a while, and, Anthony reminded me that if I am aligned with Joe Schoen in a train of thought, maybe I'm wrong. So, what he said was, the right way to go about rebuilding is theoretically, we have a lot of good cap space. Our cap situation is really, really solid, is to draft a rookie quarterback and then have 5 years of rookie contract performance. That's what good teams do. You look at the Eagles, they did it with Jalen Hurts. They took that rookie quarterback contract, they extended him, they developed void years, and they created a very healthy cap situation where they could compete for the next 5-6 seasons and not have to pay up. So I think most Eagles fans are probably pretty happy with what's going on right now. They were able to pay some star players. Hurts is not making that much money at a $20 million cap hit this past season. And the Giants have a chance to do something similar. Now, Joe Schoen did lead up that answer and said, hey, also, we have to make sure that quarterback we're drafting is worthy of being drafted. And, I think there's, when it comes to prospects, a lot of unknowns. And, if you have a guy you have conviction in, I think they will like Cam Ward or Sanders enough to take one. You can't be sitting there regretting a decision like that. You can't look back a year later and say, we should have taken that guy. Like, he looks good in the NFL now. You just never know how a player is going to fare at the next level. So you have to take shots at the quarterback position, which is another thing he said. You always have to take swings at the most important position in football. The problem is, Joe, you didn't draft a quarterback in the last 3 years in any round, whether it be a flyer like Joe Milton in the 5th or anybody in the 1st or J.J. McCarthy or a high-end bridge that could compete, or not a bridge, but rather a high-end competitor to compete directly with Daniel Jones. You didn't bring in anyone to really offer any sort of upside, right? Drew Lock was never it. We knew that. So, Anthony, starting at the first kind of topic here in the sense that the right way to rebuild oftentimes is through a rookie contract like a rookie quarterback has. And then Joe Schoen saying the best way to go about the position is to take a lot of swings. I know that probably rubbed you the wrong way for sure.
Well, it's what I've been saying all offseason long, and since last offseason when you're picking early, or even if you're not, you have to throw darts at the board for a quarterback. And I've tried to explain this many times. It's not necessarily about your conviction in a particular prospect. It's a probability game. You know, when people say analytics, they think, oh, PFF grades. No, analytics is numbers and data. And the data suggests if you go through the probability that the more you draft a quarterback, the higher chance you have of hitting on a quarterback and finding a guy that you end up paying a second contract to. And the reality of it is, the data also suggests the earlier you draft a quarterback, the more likely you are to pay them a second contract and actually make them a long-term starter. All of the top starters in the NFL were first or second round draft picks, barring just a few anomalies like a Dak Prescott or a Brock Purdy. Those are the only guys, and a few others. First and second round draft picks are usually starting quarterbacks for the long term in the NFL. Now, obviously, there are a bunch of busts, but like I've said, you could find many examples, Alex, of teams that drafted a quarterback early and moved on rather quickly, found a new quarterback, and now they're winning teams. Whether you want to talk about the Steelers, who drafted Kenny Pickett and then very quickly moved on from him, brought in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields in the same offseason, turned over that quarterback position, were able to maintain their status as a playoff team. That's because they took a shot early, they missed, they moved on quickly, and that's the key here. It's not necessarily the fact that you reach on a quarterback, because you have to throw a dart at the board, but you have to keep throwing darts at the board. You don't just draft a quarterback number 6 overall that you reached on and never take another chance at the quarterback position. You have to keep throwing darts, keep taking swings, as Joe Schoen kind of phrased it very similarly to how I do. So you look at that, and you look at these quarterbacks around the league who maybe get passed over, right? Let's talk about Trey Lance for the San Francisco 49ers. All that they gave up still didn't prevent them, even though they drafted Trey Lance, didn't prevent them from drafting Brock Purdy as well. Now who's their franchise quarterback? Miami Dolphins traded for Josh Rosen, didn't prevent them from drafting Tua Tagovailoa. Now who's their franchise quarterback? So it happens all the time in the NFL. Even the Bears, they drafted Justin Fields only a few years ago. Could they have kept him and spent the number 1 overall pick on Marvin Harrison Jr.? Absolutely they could have, but they didn't want to because they knew that rookie contract for the quarterback, that window was soon closing. So they reset that window by drafting Caleb Williams. So that ties in to the other half of this question, the rookie contract for a quarterback and building around a quarterback on that rookie contract. Go look at what the Los Angeles Chargers have done. They built a playoff roster. They had Justin Herbert on a rookie contract for several years, added a bunch of talent around him, Rashawn Slater, were able to pay Joey Bosa, were able to trade for Khalil Mack, were able to trade for Elijah Moulton and pay him, and they still have, now that they've even paid Justin Herbert, still have $70 million in cap space and a much better roster than the one that the New York Giants have, and a very competitive roster for the AFC, which is a very strong conference. So that is the model. That is how NFL teams do it. You draft a rookie quarterback, you build around the rookie quarterback while he's in that window. I think we all should remember how the Kansas City Chiefs, when they drafted Patrick Mahomes, the way that they invested so much talent at all of these other positions into the trenches. They traded for Joe Tooney. They made that trade for that one offensive tackle whose name I can't remember. They made so many moves to build around Mahomes. Then they paid Mahomes, and now obviously they've had to offload some of their assets and then go back to building through the draft. But that's the model. That truly is how you do it. You get the rookie, you plug him in, and you build around him. Now, the roster building part of it is step 2, and that's the crucial aspect of it that the New York Giants plainly got wrong with Daniel Jones. Again, I've said this before, taking Daniel Jones 6th overall wasn't bad practice. Yes, it was a reach. No, he wasn't worthy of a top 10 pick, but even still, they took a chance because what if he was better than people realized? What if he was a franchise quarterback? And hey, maybe he could have been because he did show some promise as a rookie. But then the roster building aspect of it, the Giants failed. And then the inability to move on from Jones in a timely manner, they really fumbled that aspect of it. And that's why they're in the mess that they're in. So you've got to be able to take chances at the quarterback position, admit when your chance that you took was wrong, and move on promptly. That's how you build a roster around a quarterback in the NFL. It's not by just trading for a veteran and trying to win now, even though you have a 3-14 roster. And listen, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Matthew Stafford is one of my favorite quarterbacks that I've ever watched play the game of football. But the New York Giants are not in a win-now position. So they, I don't think, can go ahead and sacrifice premium draft capital that could be spent on a rookie quarterback contract or other valuable rookie contracts at premium positions and throw it at a 37-year-old quarterback who needs $50 million per season. That's going to take up all the Giants' projected salary cap space, and it's also going to take away their valuable top 100 draft picks. And I don't think that they are in a position coming off of a 3-14 season to do that. So, Alex, I think we've pretty much discussed everything that we need to discuss with Stafford, and Joe Schoen didn't give us anything new about Stafford. So the next thing that I want to talk about is he's open to a trade. And what I'll say about this, Joe Schoen is like the trader in the NFL right now. Like for the last 3 off seasons, he's just been making great trades. Or not great, but big trades. He's been
Big
making
trades.
big blockbuster trades. I don't want to call him
Yes.
great. He traded up for Deontay Banks. He traded up for Jalen Hyatt. He traded for Darren Waller. He traded for Brian Burns. What do you think the likelihood is? He said that he's open to trading the number 3 pick. What do you think the likelihood is that it actually gets traded? Do you think it's a higher than 50% chance, or do you think it's more likely that they stay put?
I think that the only way they're going is up. They're not going down. The Giants are not trading below 3 because why the hell would you? Look, we talk about Joe Schoen saving his job. Trading back from 3 is the exact opposite of what he needs to be doing. He needs to be getting a player that's going to make an immediate impact, or at least a quarterback that's going to make an impact at some point in their rookie season. Going back in the draft to acquire assets for 2026 is against his preference because he may not be here to spend the picks. You know what I mean? So, I do, unless he's getting an extra second rounder this year where you walk away with like Mason Graham or Will Johnson, and then you're able to get a dress right guard and a receiver, like maybe, but you're gonna have to go back far to get another second round pick in this draft. You're gonna have to go back to 10, and at that point, you're missing out on every first round grade in this draft class, let alone the blue chippers. And the truth is that I think I'd rather have Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter than an extra second round pick because like those 2 guys have the highest probability of hitting and being quality players. Everything below 5 is a huge gamble. So, I think like in terms of getting a guy, being at 3, I think the only option for the Giants at this point for Joe Schoen is going up and getting your quarterback or staying put and hoping one of them fall to you or just taking BPA.
Yeah, and I have to say that I do agree with you. I know that there's definitely an argument to make. This team has a lot of holes. They've got a lot of positions that they need to fill in, and trading down would help them accomplish that goal. They could get an extra top 100 pick, and that could be a potential starter at 2 positions rather than just at 1 position. But for me personally, a team that is this far away from competing, I want those can't miss players on premium rookie contracts. That's why I would stick and pick at number 3 overall if I wasn't trading up. Trading up is a whole nother thing, and that's what I really want to dive into next year. But I have to say, if I were to be Joe Schoen and I were to try and entertain trading down, the conversation has to start with a future first round pick, in my opinion. Otherwise, I just don't see the point. Like, unless somebody's overpaying to move up and take that player at number 3 overall, the Giants should be taking that premium player because let's face it, they don't have a ton of premium players. Kayvon Thibodeau, who they took with the top 5 pick, has not turned into a perennial Pro Bowler. Dexter Lawrence is a premium player coming off of an injury, as is Andrew Thomas. Saquon Barkley's not in the building anymore, neither is Xavier McKinney. Bobby Okereke is good. Is he a premium player? I think that's a fringe premium player. And then, I don't know, Malik Neighbors obviously is premium, but outside of him and the playmaker group, I don't think they have any. So if you've got an opportunity with a top 3 pick to take a premium player for this roster, I think you take the premium player and you try and fill in the rest of those holes through good drafting rather than, I know I made the probability argument for the quarterback position, but I think in this case, you got to lock in a really solid player because the Giants just don't have a lot of elite talent. It's one thing to have a lot of good talent all over your roster. Doesn't mean much if you don't have a few elite players that elevate that roster, and that's where I think the Giants need to go here with the number 3 overall pick. But Alex, trading up. If the Giants trade up, it's likely to number 1 overall. Giants haven't picked number 1 in the draft since like the 70s or 60s or something. Really long time, like 50 years almost. What do you think the odds are that they actually make that move? Do you think that there's a quarterback that they're in love with enough to trade up to number 1? Obviously, we know that their draft board isn't set and they have a lot of evaluating to do, so, it's kind of projection here. But do you think that's a wise decision for the Giants to maybe try and move up, or are you still kind of believing, holding out hope, if the Giants stick and pick at 3, that quarterback will just fall into their laps anyway?
Man, if they love a quarterback, you can't sit and pick a 3 unless the move up to 1 is just an astronomical cost. You know what I mean? Unless they're asking for the moon and the stars, like you just can't do it. But I do believe that one of those quarterbacks will be there. It just depends on which one they actually want. Somebody asked Joe about Cam Ward specifically, and Joe's response, it was so bad that it actually like made me think the smokescreen's even more smoky than I thought. Because the way he responded, somebody asked him, like, what is your thoughts on Cam Ward? Like, you told us a lot about Shedeur Sanders, and there's been so many media, pieces and narratives about Sanders and the Giants and all this analysis. Tell me about Cam Ward. What do you like about him? And he barely had a response. He was like, yeah, I watched the Cal game. Yeah, Virginia Tech. Like, I watched him against Cal when he got his team in trouble, and then he digged him out of trouble, and he ended up winning the game. You want to have trust in your quarterback that they can make the throw. But yeah, like I've watched a couple of games. I haven't done that much research on him. I mean, Anthony, dude, like, are we really? If he's selling a story that we are in February, late February, the draft is 2 months away, right? And he has done minimal work on Cam Ward, one of the 2 top prospects in this draft class at a position the Giants desperately need. If he thinks that I'm gonna buy that, he must think we're absolutely dumb in the head, meant like just ill, because there is no way that Joe Schoen has not done meticulous research on both Sanders and Cam Ward and Jackson Dart at this point, right? The vague response that I got on Ward was either trying to make us feel like he was an idiot or completely hiding their intentions. Because I can't sit here and pretend like that answer was even remotely acceptable for a general manager who desperately needs a quarterback. And I get he's not going to give much information away, but it was almost too vague for me to actually take it seriously. That's kind of how I felt listening to it. I'm sure you guys have different opinions than I do. And I know my bias is certainly shown because I do want Cam Ward, but the response, even if it was about Sanders, I'd be like, that was a bad response. Like, that was a response that made you look like you don't know what you're talking about because you're like, oh, I watched a couple games. You're telling me the general manager of the New York Giants, you need a quarterback desperately, and you watch 2 games of Cam Ward? There's no freaking way, Anthony. There's no way. There's no way that is true. So there's layers and deceptiveness going on that is pre-planned. A lot of what he went into this media session was pre-planned, what he was going to say. Always. We know it. We know a lot of it's pre-planned, and the answers are written out before. How are you going to respond to this type of question? These are the type of questions you're going to get. How are you going to respond to them? And I think that the response to some of these questions were just so vague that I couldn't believe it. They want us to think that they don't know anything. You know what I mean? But we know they've done meticulous research on these players. We know he can recall. I mean, look, there's no way Joe Schoen can't recall a play that he really stood out to him against, that he watched in Sanders' film against a certain team or Cam Ward's film against a certain team. There's just simply no way that he can't recall moments of greatness, moments of that guy has it, and he can't give you those in a public setting. You know what I mean? There's just no way. That vague response was really interesting to me.
I'm just completely honest, I didn't find it interesting. I just think that it's Joe Schoen being vague as can be so that he doesn't tip his hat at all. And I'm not really going to read into it much. I get what you're saying. I get where you're coming from, but there's just not much interest. Like I listened to the response a second time just to make sure I didn't miss anything. But for me, if he's saying that he only watched 2 games, I kind of took it as he's implying he only watched 2 games in person. Not that he's only watched 2 total games on Cam Ward. He's definitely watched other games in the film room. And even if he hasn't, man, it's only February. It's almost March. Sure, they got free agency coming up.
2 months.
He's going to shake his hand and meet him in the coming days. That's what he's there for. Sure. That's what he cares about.
How are you not looking at the potential future of your franchise meticulously? Like, even if it was just in person, he could have been like, yeah, and I've watched multiple games on film too. Like, I have a pretty good understanding where Cam Ward is as a player. Instead, he was like, nah, like I watched a couple games and I saw him get his team into trouble and then dig himself out. Like, that was the depth of his response, which I feel is quite weak in terms of which I'm trying to say
is going into depth though. I don't want him going into depth. That's going to drive the price up for pick number 1.
But that's what I'm saying. Is that I don't believe that it's as vague as he's making it sound. You know what I mean? Like, I agree with you. Like, I think there's a lot more depth there that he's hiding because he doesn't want to drive the price up or create a narrative that may put him in a difficult spot.
I don't even necessarily think that's true. He might actually not have that much depth. I don't think that the general manager. Though. I don't think it is that crazy. The general manager doesn't need to be scouting and watching film all throughout October, November, December. There's an entire scouting department and team that does that for him, presents him with the information.
I mean, his job is on the line, dude.
As well. Yeah, his job is on the line.
2 quarterbacks to pick at 3, and he doesn't know exactly. He hasn't watched all the film, a lot of stuff on these 2 guys at this point with a combine this week. You know what I mean? Like, he already said, I mean, to correlate, he said, I don't really care what the combine shows, which means that he has already done the work to know what these players are capable of. He's watched
the film, but even if he hasn't watched as much film, I don't know. It kind of feels like we're assuming that he either watched a certain amount of film or he didn't. I don't know. We don't know how much film and how much time he studied, but you got to keep in mind there's 250 draftable players in this class.
For sure.
Maybe he starts in the late rounds and gets to the top rounds. Maybe he trusts his, because that might make more sense if you feel as though your scouting department does a really good job with those early round players, rely on them and go take a look at some of those late round players in the meantime and circle back to those early round players. That could be, we don't really know what their process or strategy is. Hard Knocks didn't reveal that much, and the draft isn't till the end of April, so he's got all of March. And keep in mind, Joe Schoen's got a lot to do right now that has nothing to do with the draft. He's at the combine so that he can meet these players. He really should not be watching film on NFL draft prospects right now. He should be watching film on NFL players getting prepared for free agency. How does this guy fit my scheme? Should I sign him at this APY? Who is this player and what does he bring to the table?
That stuff is more for the scouting team, though. Like that, those types of things should be more for the scouting team, like for Brandon Brown, stuff like that.
There
like,
are area
when it comes
scouts.
to the quarterback, it's the most important position. Like he should be locked in on that because that decision is going to decide his future.
Joe Schoen is not the premier talent evaluator in the building.
Sure.
He hires somebody to be his premier talent evaluator. That's the guy who should be studying the quarterbacks, and that's the guy who is. Joe Schoen needs to be going through and making sure that he is matching up the price value of the free agents that he's about to sign to where they are justified in their market value, because that's the most important thing since he is the man who manages the cap and signs these contracts. That's priority number one for the GM. They do the talent evaluation. They're part of that process, but there's area scouts, there's national scouts, there's regional scouts. Those are the guys who actually scout the draft prospects, present that information to the general manager, and the general manager looks it over. I don't expect him to be out there completely grinding quarterback film all day long. He went to several games. Maybe he should be doing more film work. I don't know. We don't know what his process is, but my takeaway is just that maybe he hasn't watched a ton of the film. Maybe he doesn't feel like he needs to. He went to the games, knows what he's looking for, checked off the pros and the cons of those guys. He's going to get to the film later after he meets them, because why study all that time in the film room if you go and you have that interview with Cam Ward and you think, okay, I don't want to draft this kid. I don't want anything to do with him. Then you kind of just wasted all your time. But it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible.
You got to
like,
meet
why
the player. But listen to what he's been saying. He said he wants to make sure that all of the players are a good fit for the Giants first.
Absolutely.
Before they even consider drafting them. So go ahead, meet him, make sure that he would be a good fit, then dive deeper into that film. That makes sense to me. I think that's one way that you could cut this process up, and we say this all the time. There is no one way to go through this process. There's so many different ways. Maybe that's the way Joe Schoen does it. He gets a baseline of information about these quarterbacks, he meets them, and then he dives in deeper. That's totally possible. But again, I'm just saying, there are scouts that are required to do the scouting.
Yes.
He takes the information, synthesizes it, and comes up with a decision, signs off on the final decision. But Joe Schoen isn't the premier talent evaluator in the Giants building. That's not the way that they operate. Maybe we wish that they had a GM who operated that way and was a premier talent evaluator, but that's clearly not the way that the New York Giants operate. I actually think that's what Ryan Cowden, who just left to go to the Patriots, was doing for them last year, was primarily a lot of that scouting. He might have been a big loss considering how great that draft class was last year. But again, I just think right now Joe Schoen's primary focus for the week is to talk to other talk to other GMs and agents and find out who he could sign in free agency 2 weeks from now. I don't think he's actually all that entrenched into the film room right now looking at prospects, when he really needs to make sure that he gets free agency nailed, get that done with, then focus on the film, then get ready for the draft at the end of April. He's got the entire month of April to dive into the film, and I think he'll do it then.
Well, if that's the case, if that's what you believe, the chances of the Giants drafting Shedeur Sanders just skyrocketed, because his primary talent evaluator is Brandon Brown. That's his primary talent evaluator. And Brandon Brown loves Shedeur Sanders.
That's you making these assumptions based on these anonymous quotes. They are anonymous.
No, we know
somebody
could
have made them up.
We know. I mean, we've also seen Brandon Brown at the practices. I mean, of course, like the media obviously has showed all those things. And Jordan Reed's a pretty respected ESPN reporter, and he said an NFC assistant general manager specifically loves Shedeur Sanders right around the time Brandon Brown was hanging out at Colorado's practices. So, like, okay, yeah, it's an assumption for sure. It's a pretty good one. It's a pretty good link. You know, there's a pretty high probability it's Brandon Brown. And if that's the case, and Joe Schoen's taking the information and scouting analysis from Brandon Brown, that means that it's probably true. However, if I'm Joe Schoen and my job is on the line and I need a quarterback, I'm diving in really deep to the quarterback class. And I'm letting my scouts do all the work on the second round guys, third round guys, fourth. I'm focused on this quarterback class. And he did the same thing last year. They met with JJ, with Drake, with Penix. They met with 5 different quarterbacks.
And they're going to do that again.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. But I'm saying intensively. And didn't take a single one. And they do that process every single year, obviously, but this one's a little bit, that's what I'm trying to say is like they went intense with 5 different players, even 6 maybe. So these 2, and he's not going to fool me saying that he's only watched a game or 2. I think he's done a lot more work on all of these guys than he makes it sound, which is what I want, by the way, because you said it before, and I think that was a good point. Why show your hand? Why tip your hand? Why give the Titans a reason to believe that you are hyper focusing on a position? Everyone knows the Giants need a quarterback. It's not like it's like big news, but giving any team a potential piece of information they can use to twist that knife if you're in a trade scenario obviously is not beneficial to you. So I get why he was vague, but I'm not buying it. I just think that there's more depth to it. I think that there is a lot more research, a lot more analysis that's gone into his offseason so far. That's just how I feel, but I could be wrong. And I don't know. I just feel like we've seen Joe. We've seen all these guys at the Senior Bowl, at the Shrine Bowl. Like, we've seen them meet these quarterbacks already. I think they've done a lot of work on them so far.
Yeah, they've definitely done work on the quarterbacks, but I'm telling you, the majority of the work that they do, scouting those players and nailing down their draft board, happens after free agency. It's not, the scouts are doing all of that work leading up to free agency. After free agency, those top executives nail down the draft board. He definitely does not have his mind made up, in my opinion, over who's QB1 versus QB2. He definitely has not poured hours upon thousands of hours into watching Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders' film. There's just no reason that he should have been doing that, in my opinion. That actually doesn't make sense. The Giants have to get their free agency right first and foremost. Joe Schoen needs to focus on that. After free agency, dive deeper into the quarterback film. So I actually am a believer that he hasn't studied the film as much as we all want to believe. I don't think he needs to study all that much film until after free agency. What's the point, Alex, if they watch thousands and thousands of hours of Cam Ward film and then, okay, new league year, they just traded for Matt Stafford and they just traded away the number 3 pick. Wow, Joe Schoen just wasted all of that time watching Cam Ward. I'm telling you, he's not watching that much Cam Ward until after free agency. Then he's going to dive into Cam Ward, Shedeur, all of the quarterbacks. Free agency has to fall as a domino first. Then he will do the deeper research into these quarterbacks. But I'm telling you, I really don't believe that he has watched all that much film. I think it was a vague answer because he wants to be vague and he doesn't want to tip his hand. But also, at the same time, he doesn't have all that much information to share because he probably hasn't collected that much information because he probably hasn't watched that much film, and he won't until free agency is set in stone and he knows what the New York Giants roster looks like, what their needs are, and what their attack strategy is going to be once they get to the draft all the way at the end of April. It's 2 full months. They've got a lot of time, and I don't see any reason why Joe Schoen should have poured that much time into these quarterbacks other than the time that he's already poured into it. Again, I just don't think that the valuation process is as strenuous as you might think that it is. It's just watching film after collecting information from your scouts and kind of reaffirming other people's opinions that you hired to give you those opinions. He's going to do that after free agency, in my opinion.
It's definitely possible. I'll give you another piece of information that certainly throws something into the mix here, dude. Apparently, Adam Schefter reported about an hour ago that he'd be very surprised if the Browns did not end up taking a quarterback at number 2 overall. So now we're seeing another report conflicting from the one we heard last week that the Browns were not taking a quarterback 3rd overall, or rather 2nd overall. So the deceptive measures are in full play. That means to me the Giants are going to have to move up to get their player. If they want a quarterback, they're probably going to have to trade up to number 1 to get him at this point. So we'll see. Or maybe 2. Who knows?
I'm glad you bring that up because that gets us back on track to the original question that I asked you, which was, do you think the Giants are going to have to trade up to number 1 overall? Yes,
I do,
think
though.
that they do.
I do.
I think they do have to trade up to number 1 overall, whether that's for Shedeur or Cam. I don't think they want to chance it. Even if they think that, because Schefter's saying this today, the day that all of the teams just met up at the Combine, tells you anything you heard before this was a maybe. Now, he actually feels rather confident that the Browns are going to go quarterback. So the Giants are going to feel confident as well after they leave the Combine. And what's that going to tell you? Even if their quarterback is Shedeur, Cam, whatever your preferences might be, don't matter. Whatever the Giants' preferences are, doesn't matter either. They need to make sure that they're picking 1st overall so that either way, they get their guy and that they don't leave it up to chance. Because if they stick and pick at 3, let's say everybody knows for sure the Titans are going Abdul Carter at number 1 because they just traded for Stafford. Let's just throw it out there and just pretend. Mm-hmm. Let's say everybody knows they're not going quarterback at number 1. You still don't know which quarterback the Browns are going to take. So you better get to number 1 anyway so that you don't leave it up to chance. That's got to be the New York Giants mindset, in my opinion. If you got a quarterback that you want to draft, you have to do everything you can to draft that quarterback and not let him fall into the laps of an opponent, in my opinion. Now, again, last year, Joe Schoen had a price limit. That was a big deal during those negotiations with the Patriots. I know a lot of people say, oh, the Giants couldn't have traded for Drake May because the Patriots weren't going to give him up. That's actually not true. The Patriots made it clear that there was a price tag. The Giants had a price limit. Those two things had a sizable gap between them, so they didn't trade up for Drake May. If Joe Schoen didn't have a price limit and said, I will pay whatever price you ask, the Giants could have Drake May right now. Mm-hmm. That's according to the reporting that we heard last year. Now we're going to find out, does he still have a price limit? Or is he desperate enough to say, whatever your price tag is, we are willing to pay to get the number one overall and draft our quarterback? That's what this is going to come down to. And that's actually a good question to ask you, Alex, and everybody else who's listening and following along with us. What's your price limit? Do you have a price limit? Or are you getting up to number one overall no matter what to make sure that you get your quarterback? That is the major question here for all Giants fans and for Joe Schoen to wonder. Last year, you had a price limit. You could argue it came back to bite you. You could argue it worked out because you got Malik Neighbors, and now you could still get a quarterback this offseason. But do you have a price limit this offseason, especially considering it is a weaker quarterback class, and you're not drafting a Drake May prospect? This prospect is not going to be as good as Drake May, whether it's Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders in a prospect evaluation. Who knows who's better in the NFL? Obviously, that's all projection. We don't know. But in terms of prospect ratings, both Cam and Shedeur are below Drake. So now, do you have a price limit? Do you lower the limit? Do you raise the limit? I think it's a pretty interesting conundrum that Joe Schoen finds himself in.
I do think you're right. It is a conundrum that Joe Schoen finds himself in, and I'm glad I'm not the one making the decision. Because everyone grades these players and has different outlooks for these players and projections individually. And, you know, the rumors that are coming out, we hear the Raiders want to move up for Sanders. You know, we're going to hear it. It's all lie season. It's BS season, guys. Like, we're going to hear this nonstop. Most of it's going to be fake. Most of it's just going to be narratives for the media or narratives that they're trying to create deceptive measures. But the truth is that teams kind of know where they're going to go. Teams kind of know what other teams are going to do, unless it's some, like, whoa moment that it just unexpectedly comes together last second. They have general ideas, but in my opinion, to answer your question, would I be willing and what would I be willing to trade up to get a player? I look, this draft class, you never know who's going to be good, who's not going to be good. All I can do is base it off of the prospect grades that I do have, and I don't want to trade up to first overall. I don't want to, and the reason I say that is because the worst case scenario, dude, is that we walk away with one of the blue chip prospects. This team is bad. Like, the Giants are a bad football team, guys. We need as much talent, elite talent, as we can get. If we walk away with Abdul Carter and you got Carter, Brian Burns, and Dexter Lawrence, our trenches on the defensive side are elite. You know, by most measurements, are elite. Travis Hunter and Deonte Banks. Hunter immediately becomes your CB1, or he becomes a WR1 alongside Malik Neighbors, and you go get yourself a veteran quarterback for a year or two, and then maybe you look to next year's draft class and trade up to get a quarterback then. But again, you never know. Is there going to be a team that needs a quarterback that doesn't want to move out, and is it going to cost you a leg and an arm to get there? You know what I mean? Like, you just don't know. You can't go into a draft class avoiding a quarterback with the intention of we'll get one next year, because it doesn't work like that. You have to think about now and getting something now. So for Cam Ward, personally, I would trade up for Cam Ward to first overall because I do believe his upside is that great. What I'd be willing to give is a different story. I don't necessarily know. I think that I'd probably be willing to give up this year's third-round pick and next year's second-round pick for Cam Ward. Shedeur Sanders, I don't think he's worth trading up for personally. I don't think I would trade up to number one for Shedeur Sanders. That's my personal opinion. I know other people will disagree. Joe Schoen could disagree, and he could see him as a guy that he'd be willing to trade up for. I'd be willing to trade up for Cam Ward. The most I'd go is this year's third, next year's second. That's just how I feel about this quarterback class. I could be totally wrong. Sanders could end up being great. Cam could end up sucking donkey balls. I have no idea. This is just where we are, and this is where I am in my analysis and my projections. But look, we none of us know anything, so I could totally be off.
You could be, and so could I be, and so could Joe Schoen be. Everybody could be off. But let me say this. The only thing that I won't do in a trade-up is give up the 2026 first-round pick. And the reason being, my whole argument that I keep making about having to throw darts at the board and take chances on a quarterback, I'm going to make sure that even if I trade up and I take a quarterback this year, if I really get buyer's remorse within a year, I've got the ability to draft another quarterback next year. That's my whole point here. I'm keeping that 2026 first round pick no matter what in order to assure myself that I have another dart to throw at the board if I need to. Like it's basically, break glass in case of emergency. That's my 2026 first round pick. Ideally, the quarterback shows some promise as a rookie. You don't have to go quarterback back to back in the first round. I really would hate to do that, but I need to have it as a backup plan. I need to have that insurance for myself. So that's the only thing that's really off the table for me. But if it costs 2 second round picks, Alex, yeah, I'm probably trading 2 second round picks to make sure I draft a quarterback, because that's what you do. You get a quarterback, you throw a dart at the board, you build around them, and you hope that you got it right. And if you get it wrong, you try again. And that's why I'm keeping that future first round pick. But other than that, I think everything's got to be on the table if you're Joe Schoen and you're the New York Giants and you need to get a quarterback. Now, again, you do make a good argument, though. You could stick and pick, and worst case scenario, you're getting a blue chip prospect. Best case scenario, you're throwing a dart at the board for a quarterback. My thing is, though, the New York Giants, at some point in the 7 rounds of this 2025 NFL draft, Alex, they have to draft a quarterback. I don't care if it's in round 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. At some point, they better draft a quarterback. I don't care if they trade for Matthew Stafford. I don't care if they sign Russell Wilson. I don't care if they somehow make a trade for Justin Herbert, which is never going to happen. He's a bolt. But at some point in this draft, you better take a quarterback and give yourself a rookie quarterback contract to have, whether you're growing him into a backup role long term or you see legitimate starting upside potential for him in 2 years' time. You have to throw a dart at the board in this year's class. It's been 6 years. I don't care if it's at pick number 3, number 34, or number 65. Draft a quarterback in this class and give yourself a long-term future at the position. Has to happen. So let's say, Alex, in this case, the Giants do have a price limit and the Titans have a price tag and they refuse to accept the New York Giants offer for the number 1 overall pick. They take Shedeur Sanders, let's say he goes number 1. Let's say Cam Ward goes number 2 to the Browns and the Giants are sitting there at number 3. You're taking best player available, and you are going to go ahead, in my opinion, and make sure you still draft a quarterback with your second pick in this draft, whether that's trading up to pick 17, 10, 25, wherever you have to do it, you go ahead and you take Jackson Dart. So it's kind of funny now, we're in this situation, Alex, where we're coming full circle. Like a month ago, this was our conversation. Well, if we're not going to be able to get a quarterback, let's just make sure that we get one at the end of the first round by trading up for a Dart or whoever, right? And I think that, the more we talk about it, the more we go off the beaten path, we just return home every single time. And so it's really just a full circle moment. That's how I feel. I always have been saying that I'm willing to trade up to number 1, make sure that we get our quarterback. But at the same time, if it's not possible, I'll take the best player available at number 3 because this team needs elite talent, and we'll get one at number 3. But I will make sure that I'm drafting a quarterback in the first 2 rounds of this draft, and no matter what. Even if I'm reaching on that second quarterback, whatever, take this thing away because we just drafted an elite player at number 3 overall. So I'll reach for that second pick that I'm making because I need to get a rookie quarterback in here because the number 1 position that's toughest to project is quarterback. So even if you're like, well, he's probably a bust, the off chance that he isn't is actually way higher than you realize because a lot of guys who aren't supposed to be good quarterbacks end up being great quarterbacks. Look at all those late round prospects that were just dart throws at the board and ended up being stars. So that's my outlook on it. I would be willing to trade up to number 1. There's only one asset that's off the table for me, and that's the future 2026 first-round pick. Other than that, I want to see the Giants try and be aggressive and get it to the number 1 overall pick to take a quarterback. But if they don't, I'm not going to flail my arms and be upset as long as they take a quarterback inside the top 100 selections in this year's draft.
Yeah, and listen, the Giants have an opportunity to at least start to trend in the right direction. We'll do like a big kind of episode where we go through our like step-by-step process and like how we'd fix this team, or like how we would go about the draft and free agency, and free agency is coming up. So I think that maybe in the next 2 weeks or so after the combine, just get some analysis, see kind of what the rumors are for free agency. We'll put together like a step-by-step plan of like what we would do like individually, because I know you and I have different opinions on certain matters, but like to save Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, if they want to save themselves, they need to show substantial offensive progression. Like, they got to go from bottom of the pack to at least middle of the pack this year. Like, they have to be at least an average offense. The way to accomplish that is basically getting that quarterback in the draft. You have to draft. I mean, Abdul Carter's going to be great for your defense, but he's not going to get you there offensively. So immediately you're kind of behind the chains with a Carter acquisition. Although I would love Abdul Carter. Always good to have more pass rushers, especially elite ones. So by no means would I be upset with a pick like that. It just doesn't help what's going to save Joe and Daboll at this point. They need offense bad because better offense keeps your defense off the field. And so you can kind of mitigate problems that way to a degree. They also are going to probably give Kayvon that 5th-year option, which means that he's going to start next season. And they'll probably draft a pass rusher in like the 4th round or the 3rd round. Someone with some upsides, maybe a great trait that they can develop. We'll see how things go. But in my opinion, the way to save themselves is you got to use that 1st-round pick on a quarterback. And if it means trading up to get one, so be it. In the 2nd round, I know people would love a defensive tackle, and I'd be fine with that. There's a really good defensive tackle class. You can get a starter there. But I'd also be really fine, and Joe Schoen said it today, they have an opening at right guard right now, right? Greg Van Roten's a free agent. Evan Neal is Evan Neal. And you have Jake Kubas as the other option. They need a starting right guard, and they need one badly because they need to support Jermaine Illuminor, and they badly need to support John Michael Schmitz because he cannot sustain more turnover at that position. You know I love Jonas Avenaya out of Arizona, so I would not blink to acquire him at right guard, or I'd go to the free agent market and find a guy in the caliber range of John Runyon and $10 million a year, and the cap going up, that's a fine contract. You get a average, slightly above average player to play, depending on who that is. You know, I've mentioned Patrick McCarry. There's other options too. So you go into free agency to get yourself a right guard, or you spend that 2nd-round pick on a right guard, or you go the receiver route and you go get Jaden Higgins, or you go get somebody else. Forget the other guy that we had discussed a couple episodes ago. Jaden Higgins, and who's the other one that we discussed about?
Trey Harris,
right. So go get one of those 2 guys, and now you have a Malik Neighbors and a real WR2 with upside and potential, both on rookie contracts, by the way. So there's a couple avenues to go out here, but I would go with right guard or receiver in the 2nd round because I think that this team needs substantial offensive firepower and a good bridge quarterback. Like, they can revitalize this whole thing. What are you gonna say? Or trade for Alec Pierce, your buddy.
I'm not doing any of that. I'm just taking the best player available. This team fucking sucks. We are not in position to draft for need. There's so many holes on this roster. Dude, you know how I feel about this, bro. You know how I feel about this. Take the best player available. I'm not making any plan. Oh, I'm going to take a DT here. I got to take a wide receiver here. I got to do this. No. Every position is a need for this Giants team. They could use another receiver. They could use another DT. They could use another guard, a tackle for depth. They could use a corner. They could use a safety. Even if they go and they sign these positions in free agency, that's just short-term, stopgap, aging veterans. Go build long-term. Take the best player available. That's it. That's my strategy. I get the quarterback in the 1st round. That's the only position that I take out of need, and I've said that however many times I have on this show. I take the quarterback out of need. I do everything else by the best player available, especially when my roster is this shitty. It is the bottom of the NFC East. The NFC East gap was the one that Joe Schoen promised to close in the next few years. It's widened like a motherfucker. He needs to close that gap somehow. He needs to draft best player available. If he drafts for need again this year, watch. Once again, look at last year's draft class, Alex. They filled so many needs. That's me right now. Listen. They drafted for need last year, and they hit on those draft picks, right? Because they had so many needs. They had to draft for need. Tyrone Tracy Jr. was a hit. Tyler Newman was a hit. Drew Phillips was a hit. They won 3 fucking games. Drafting for need doesn't win you games. Drafting your best players available, that wins you games in the long run. Drafting for need doesn't. That asks you to make your rookies starters immediately, put way too much pressure on them. They get hurt. They stunt their growth and development because they didn't have time to grow. Just take the BPA. That's what the Eagles did. Everybody wants to say, oh, the Eagles, well, we got to build like the Eagles, do what the Eagles do. Well, look at what the Eagles did. The only time that I remember them reaching on need is when they took Jalen Hurts in the 2nd round. Everything else, best player available. When they took Jalen Carter, people were like, oh, man, why are they taking him? They still got Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham. Well, you know why? Because he was immediately going to step in and be a top 10 player at his position, and he is, and now he's on the Eagles, and they have those other guys on their defensive line in addition to Jalen Carter. When they took Quinyon Mitchell, that was great. In the 2nd round, who did they take? Cooper DeJean. Why? Because they draft the best player available. They already took a corner, so no, they don't need to draft another corner. They've still got Darius Slay as well.
Yeah.
Screw that. Draft another one. Keep taking the best player available. That's how you stack talent. That's how you get a stacked roster like the one that the Eagles have that won them a championship. It's the same thing the Chiefs did. It's the same thing that the Patriots did. Remember when the Patriots drafted Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski in the same draft class? Because they were the best players available at the time. They don't draft for need. The best teams don't. The Giants do. That's why the Giants keep falling down, and that gap keeps widening between them and the other NFC East teams. So, respectfully, Alex, I got a little angry, not really at you, but more so at the Giants. But when you're picking these positions, like I'm going to draft this here, I'm going to draft that there, that's how you fall into the trap that the Giants have fallen into. Just take the best player who's there on the draft board then. That's how you'll build a winning roster.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's totally good practice. And when it comes to the Eagles, I think that what helps them a lot is they have their quarterback figured out. They have that commitment. You know what I mean? Like they know they don't have to draft, for a specific position because they have their quarterback and they've created those void years in that contract healthy situation where they can add pieces in free agency as well. They just scooped up Saquon for $12.5 million, and they did it without blinking an eye, and they could do it easily, and they just went BPA across the board. And they've been doing it. They did it with Nolan Smith. They did it with, every single player on that freaking team was the best player at their position on their draft board when they were available, and everyone walked away like, how did the Eagles land all these guys? Every time. You know what I mean? Every single time. How did the Eagles land all these freaking guys? Well, they made good trades, acquired other selections by trading away older talent, and that's kind of what happens when you have that cycle of VPA, is that even though you don't need that position, you can trade the player ahead of them, and you can get extra draft capital, and then you can replace them for a rookie on a free agent deal, or rather a rookie contract. So, it does long term definitely have a lot of benefits and rewards. But the Giants last year, they do this thing where they only draft tight ends in the 4th round. Probably pisses you off. Like they only draft specific positions at specific times. But I do believe last year they went BPA on their board. I think Malik Neighbors was the top player on the board, and that's what they committed to. And Anthony, Neighbors was our best player last year, so I guess it worked out quite well.
Neighbors was the number 1 player on my draft board, and I did say last offseason it's either a quarterback or it's Neighbors because he's my BPA. So, and that's what it comes down to for me. If you're not reaching for the quarterback, you take the best player available, which is what I keep saying. So last offseason, the Giants, it was good practice. If they weren't taking a quarterback, take the best player available, and they did. I really, truly believe that Malik Neighbors was the best talent. I know I got heat for it last offseason. Don't try and correct me in the comment section to say this isn't true. Go back and find it. The number 1 player that I had at the wide receiver position in last year's draft was not Marvin Harrison Jr. I had Malik Neighbors, and we had good debates about that too, Alex. I had Neighbors as number 1, so when the Giants took him, I was hyped up. I even threw a freaking piece of tape on top of my Daniel Jones jersey and wrote Neighbors on it because I was so excited. If you're not taking a quarterback, take the best player available. That's always been my take. It's going to continue to be my take. Anybody who says I'm not consistent, you got to check yourself because I am consistent. This has always been my take on how to draft in the NFL. Take the quarterback when you need it. If you miss the quarterback, just take the best player available like the Eagles do, like the Chiefs do, like the Patriots do. All these teams, that's how you're going to build a winning roster. And I hope that the New York Giants have a winning roster by the time we get to 2026 because I really don't think that I can do this all over again.
No, I think that's valid. And, it's a situation where the Giants, if they get the quarterback they want, they can just go BPA the rest of the way and just try to build this roster. And the problem is, and we've made this point multiple times, Anthony, is that the Giants draft players in the 4th, 5th, and 6th rounds to play. You know what I mean? Even the 3rd, 2nd, 3rd rounds to play. And we're not talking about play, we're talking about start. And we're talking about start immediately and be impact pieces. That is a huge red flag for a team that has 3 years now with Joe Schoen, 3 years now, and our entire rookie draft class last season started. That should be a really big red flag to ownership and to the fan base. And I think it is. You guys everyone here thinks Joe Schoen's been horrible over the first 3 years. So, we can't go into this season, and that's how things are not going well. Well, Anthony, we're going into a draft class right now knowing that all of those picks have to contribute next year in a big way. Right? A big, big way. This isn't a situation like it was when we won the Super Bowl, like Jake Ballard steps in and has like a really good year. Like these rookies step in, like Bradshaw. This is not that, right? That team was already really good. And those rookies elevated their game. This is a situation where the rookies, some of them are the best players on the roster. Malik Neighbors was arguably the best player on the roster last season as a rookie, outside of maybe Dexter Lawrence. I think Andrew Phillips, as a rookie, was our best cornerback. Unacceptable. Tyrone Tracy, best running back, rookie. Theo Johnson, best tight end, rookie. We're talking about, we're drafting guys as first-year players in the 4th, 5th round, and they're already our best players on the roster. You know what I mean? That's a huge problem. Massive, massive, massive problem. So, yes, going BPA is important because you shouldn't have to draft players in the 4th and 5th round. They're automatically the best player at their position. You know what I mean? Like that's where we're hoping to strive toward. With that being said, I would go BPA for the offensive player in the 2nd round, because I do think at this point the Giants are backed up into a wall, and if their offense isn't improved substantially, they're going to get fired. Like, they're going to get fired if they don't have at least an average offense next season and show substantial progress. So they're in a tough spot where, like, they can't entirely go BPA because they have so many needs, but they also have needs at positions that will save their jobs. So I think they will go BPA in a way for an offensive player. Like, that's kind of how I see things unfolding for the Giants. But, they could go DT. Who knows? They could do that too. I think they'll take a defensive tackle in the 3rd or 4th round, though.
They'll probably take a DT in this class because the DT is going to be the best player on the board. This is a really stacked interior defensive line class. It's also a really stacked running back class. If the Giants are truly going BPA in this year's draft, we'll find out based on whether or not they draft a running back, because the odds of a running back being the best player on the board at some point in this draft is going to be very high. So, again, we'll see how it goes. I don't think the Giants are anywhere close to having any of this shit figured out because the process is so lengthy. And like we were saying earlier, I don't think that Joe Schoen has really dived into the film all that deeply just yet. He's going to do that after the free agency period, which is very, very soon. And that's the real key thing here, Alex, that I wanted to make a point of before we end. We're talking about whether or not the Giants are going to trade. We're talking about this. When do those trade negotiations start? The scouting combine. Joe Schoen, if he's going to talk to the Titans, he's going to walk over from his booth over to the Titans booth and say, knock, knock, hey, what's the price tag for the number 1 pick? Keep me in mind. Don't trade it without calling me first. Like he did on Hard Knocks last year for the Patriots, and like we know all GMs do when they're at the Combine. At the Combine last year on Hard Knocks, we saw the video where Joe Schoen goes up to Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator, and says, hey, should I trade for Brian Burns? Would you rather me do that or sign you a cornerback? He said, oh, I like Brian Burns. Go do that. Okay, Shane Bowen, now we have Brian Burns, and now we don't have a cornerback, but whatever, we have Brian Burns, so that's great. But this is where it happens. The scouting combine is where these teams start to make these decisions and start to speak amongst each other and start to have these discussions with potential free agent signings. So it's going to start this week. That's why any rumor that we hear coming out of this week, we're going to be doing these big-ass, long-ass episodes right here on the channel, breaking it all down, sparking all these types of different conversations. This is my favorite part about this show. We pick one topic, and then like 17 of them just branch out, and we all go down all these different rabbit holes, and we have these fun conversations. Half of you guys hate us for it, half of you guys love us for it, but that's what we do it for. We love the conversation and the controversy. That's the most fun thing about the NFL. There's so many different kind of topics of conversation that could spark just from one single idea. And that's what we're going to be doing again for the rest of the week as the Combine kicks off. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll have Combine risers, Combine fallers. We'll have our opinions on the quarterbacks and everything else all throughout the rest of the week. And of course, like I said, those rumors and those kind of tidbits of information that we hear from the Combine, we're going to go ahead and discuss on the channel, of course. So stay tuned to that. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Ring the bell. Make sure to give us a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. Make sure you follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, we'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one. And let's go Giants.
Perfect.